No, there was never a time that I didn't do crafts. I may have had long spaces between, but it's not something I ever gave up or would ever give up. I think my closet full of materials would attest to that. That is there to stay, and things have to be added. I think I have learned almost every craft knowable from my mom. I don't think she realized she was a crafter. It's just that she also liked to do things with her hands. And I think her great frustration was that there was no one to teach her. My grandmother had to work for a living, so there were always like neighbors or friends who would teach her. And these are the stories that she passed on to me. But I think everything that I know about crafting, I learned from her. With me, I think I was always curious about what my mom was doing. And I think I was a typical mother's child, that I wanted to be like her. So everything that she was doing, I wanted to do. But there were many times when she introduced something out of the blue, thinking I would like it, I would want to do it. And at that time, there were toys, believe it or not, that promoted crafts. I remember her buying a set of cards that had pictures on them, and the thread that was in the box was like a shoelace. You know, it had an end that you could push in and out and surround the picture with some sort of stitch. So it was things like that that she was sensitive enough to buy for me when I was small. Aside from the real crocheting and knitting, which I admit I wasn't good at all. Not at all. But I did learn it from her. And she was always encouraging. She never criticized anything that I made. She'd just say, well, just do it over, and then rip it out and do it over. When we were together, because my mother left after my father died, but the times I would visit her, she would always have a pile of magazines, and she says, I have a lot of new crafting magazines. And she would show them to me because that's where I would choose my projects that I would bring home with me to Manila. Because crafting magazines were not available here, and neither were the materials. So when I went through the magazines, I would mark out what I wanted to make and buy the yarn or the materials that I needed and bring them home to Manila. Then, of course, I learned how to buy online, and that made a whole lot of difference. My sisters do crafting, but not as much as I do. And I think it's because they don't have the time. In my family, we are 3 girls. My brother doesn't do crafting at all. He did other stuff. But we all did crafting to a certain extent. But I think I do the most because I also make things for them, or at least made for the sister of mine who passed away. When guiding someone in crafting, I don't do it for them. I try and extend my patience in teaching because when I was growing up, and we had in school, it was obligatory to have all sorts of projects, crochet, knitting, cross stitch. And there's a lot I didn't finish when I was in grade school. But my mother would say, it's your project, you finish it. She could have finished it for me, but she never did. And I think I envied my classmates a bit because they would say that their yayas or their moms would make it for them, but my mom never did. She never offered. She knew it was something that I started, it was my project, I had to finish it. So I think I learned from her. I was drawn to fiber crafts. I think it's because you can realize it right away. You work on it and work on it and work on it, and you'll see it, the finished product. It's not like some distant future that, I don't have to wait long. If I work on it, I'll see it soon, especially if I make small projects. In a couple of hours, I'll see it finished, and there's a pleasure in having finished something. The materials always came from the States initially. I would order them online and bring them home. And they're great stuffers for packing. Now they have more materials available than they used 2 years ago. But I still depend on, let's say if I need to buy a lot of one thing, I still have to buy it in the States or order it and have it sent or bring it home when I'm there. There's a pleasure in buying yarns. I would always go to Michael's, which is my favorite store in the States. And I remember when my daughter was working and I would stay with her, I'd say, just drop me off and pick me up when you get off work. So that means the whole day I would be there. And I would just be touching everything. And there's such a pleasure in touching them, looking at them, seeing the possibilities. It's a high. I call them my mental health materials because, first of all, the effects, on soul. But I remember it was a remark that I made without thinking because that's when I learned how to order stuff on the internet. I didn't have to go to the store. But when my packages started coming, this was in the States, they would, Amazon will just deliver and these big boxes will end up in your driveway. And my daughter would say, "What's that again, Ma?" And I said, "Those are my mental health materials." And she just says, "Oh." I think she knew without much explanation. She knew what it meant to me. Even if she couldn't spell it out, she knew. There is much joy in that process. There's also much frustration, but there is infinitely more joy than frustration, especially when it's finished and you look at it and enjoy looking at it and admire yourself for having completed it. Things like that no one really knows about. Only the one who makes it. Because it's not something you go around showing everybody, look what I made. And no, it's really a personal pleasure to do all this and to see it finished and to look at it over and over again. And even when you wash it before you give it away, there's a care to it, in washing it by hand and, things like that. So every step of the way is an enjoyable moment. Every step of the way. In crafting, when it gets to be very frustrating, like having to rip out a lot, I leave it. I leave it for a while and I do something entirely different. I may read a book or go to the kitchen and do something or just go out and shop or something. But I just leave it alone for a while. Sometimes for a long while, I have to leave it because going near a frustrating experience, I try to avoid it if I can. Yeah. But sometimes I'm stubborn and I'll just say, go ahead, I'll do it, I won't let it get me down. I think I grew a lot in creativity, which I really wasn't aware of. But I think when I find challenging projects, it really excites me because then it's like I have to learn something new to do this. Even if I already know my craft, when I see a challenging project, and you can see the projects are classified, beginner, experience, it will tell you on the project. So I always look for the one that's really challenging. I like to challenge myself that way. Yeah, so I think I've grown in that sense. And I think my appreciation of color has grown because sometimes all I do is sit and look at my yarn. And I wonder, what am I going to do with it this time? What's it going to be? And sometimes it surprises me when I actually put it together. Especially when I use all the leftovers. It surprises me when it's all done because it's nice. It comes out nice, yeah. No, a person doesn't have to be creative at all to do a craft because it is also just a skill many times. Like people who sew, costureras, it's a job. So the creativity may never be called in, but you can still produce something if you follow instructions, if you follow a pattern. When I am working on something, I am usually doing it with some sort of purpose. I'm making something for someone that I love, usually family members. And but then, like, when I go into what do I do with all the leftover yarns, like making little hats, I know at some point it will go to an orphanage somewhere in Baguio, and someone will use it. I mean, I may never meet those people or those children, but I know that somewhere out there, someone is wearing something I made. And I loved doing it while I was doing it. Definitely, when you're a crafter, I think frustration is probably 80% of the game. I like to browse on internet a lot because there are so many ideas there, things to do, things to make, and I want to make them all, but I can't. But nonetheless, I download all these instructions and projects to make in the hope that at some future point, I will do them. What makes me be a crafter, continuously be a crafter? I think it would be if there was a nice project. Actually, I don't know what fuels me. It's just there. And you just get this feeling that you want to do something. And when you don't have anything to do and you don't have the right materials, you get kind of restless and frustrated. So I just don't know what name to put to it, but what fuels me, it's just there. It comes and goes. Sometimes it is on a high, sometimes it's on a low, sometimes it's absent. But I know it will come around again. It's there for life. The state of crafting today, I think, is better than it has ever been. There is so much around. There is so much that people could do if they would only choose it. Materials, whether it's for painting or crafting, there's so much, and there's so many new things. So I think the state of crafting is in a great place. Maybe we just don't see people doing crafting, but I think each one has his own way of doing crafting because the materials are available, and the crafting stores are always busy. They're always busy. So there are people out there that we never get to see who do crafting. With crafting, what inspires me, I'm not really sure. I think the idea of making something, of completing something, is in itself a goal for me, exciting for me. It makes me want to, if I see an idea and I think it's doable, then that excites me to do it, or more, do it and more. I just know that when I travel, I miss my crafts because I can't bring it with me. They won't let you on the plane with your knitting needles or your scissors. So I feel kind of lost when I have quiet moments and I can't pick up something to do. So I would encourage any stage of life, you can do crafts. You can do crafts, yeah. The blanket I made, or the Afghan that I made, called the Yggdrasil, I think by far that was the most difficult of any project I ever made. And I made so many mistakes. I think it took me 6 months to make. I had ripped out so many times, and I would just cry every time I had to rip out a lot because it's a slow process, no? The ripping out. So by far that was my most difficult, but I challenged myself because it was mythological. It was Norse mythology, the Yggdrasil, wasn't it? The tree of life. So by far that was the most difficult. The next most difficult one was this, because it was lace. The yarn is so fine. I think this shawl has 1,000 yards of yarn. 1,000. And I never made anything like it before. But I was determined to make it, and I made one for my mom, this one, which I took back after she passed. And I think I made one for my daughter in another color. And she would wear it to office, and she would say, "Eat your heart out. Only I have this." And hers, I think, was a silver gray one, yeah. I used to have to set aside a time and a place for my crafts, but I don't anymore. I just do them in between my other tasks. Let's say something's in the oven or something's on the stove cooking. I would sit with my crafts and do what I can. And I just got used to the idea that I wouldn't complete anything at any given time. I just let it be. So I don't have to wait for a special time to do it. I just sit down and do it when I have free time. In between tasks, or like when it's a downtime, then I could sit longer and do more, you know, do a bigger portion of whatever it is that I was working on. I don't put a timetable anymore on the projects I make. Like, I have to finish at a certain time. No, I don't do that anymore. I used to, and it takes away some of the pleasure, you know, in having. I think if ever I put a deadline, it's a self-imposed deadline. I want to finish. I want to see it finished, yeah. Like the cross-stitch, the Amor Solo cross-stitch that I made, which I never framed. It took me 6 months to make. It took me 6 months. But it was such an experience. It was such an experience. It's difficult to explain. If I can't work on my crafting, I have to find something else to do. Read a book, go on the internet and look for more patterns. You know, there's a pleasure there in seeing them in full color, or, you know, being modeled by somebody. There's a pleasure there. So technology works for me there. I can stay for hours just looking at different projects that are possibilities. And then, of course, when you look at the sources of materials, it's amazing what they have. The colors, the combination of yarns, it's amazing. So that alone is a pleasure, to look at the possibilities. I think that's part of crafting, is the imagining. Yeah, the imagining. That's a big, even if you never get to make it, which happens to me, I desire to make something and it may take years before it becomes a reality. But there was pleasure all the way in the thinking about it, in the planning, the dreaming about it.